How's it going, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of the James Loud Show. I have my friend Scott from Crescive Soil Solutions. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing fantastic, man. Thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be on your show when we're down in the single-digit episodes. So, yeah, man, it's just great to be here. I'm Scott Skamnes. My wife and I run a business called Crescive Soil Services. We do agricultural consulting of all types, but we primarily spend time in the cannabis space, and that's how we met James, and I guess that's why we're here today.
Yeah. We met originally at the Black Sheep Boot Camp, I think 5 years ago almost now. We did some events where you were talking about soil and I was talking about genetics, and a lot of fun. There was a good group of people. I mean, we had some of the top people in the industry talking about a lot of fun stuff.
Yeah, man, I've definitely been fortunate to participate in some really cool talks and conventions, and I've been invited on stage next to extremely qualified people, of which I'm extremely grateful for. And, just to be on a show with you with somebody with as much time in the cannabis industry is definitely an honor. And obviously right now being on the James Loud Show is pretty damn cool,
Awesome. Thank you very much. So let's talk to everybody about how you got on the show today. You gave me a call last week and we had an opening, but beyond that, you had seen one of the episodes. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, man, I've been keeping in touch. You and I talk periodically, and when I've got a large client that needs seeds, you're pretty much the only person that I go to. And so we talk here and there and keep up on the industry stuff. And I've been watching some of your episodes and trying to keep track of them all. And you just had Chris Castle on, who's a living soil grower in Northern California. And I can't remember exactly what you said, but in the first few minutes, you were talking about how you've seen some significant obstacles with living soil at scale, and maybe even haven't seen a real solid example of successful living soil, which I would agree with. There's a lot of, obstacles, I guess you could say, to doing living soil at scale. And to be honest, most people haven't figured it out really. And most people haven't seen really solid examples of successful living soil. And, I like to pride myself on that. The consulting that my wife and I do is directing some of those very successful examples that you might know. And what's really interesting about living soil, and I guess really any market, is that those that are working in extremely competitive environments, they don't exactly produce a manifesto and a how-to of what they're doing to be successful. And especially now in these early years of regulated cannabis, there's not a lot of people that are actually just telling you exactly what they're doing. So that's leading to a lot of confusion. And I think there's the added complexity of, as if you're having a conversation with a hydroponic farm, they just say, I'm doing rock wool, and it's pretty straightforward. You can expect a tray table with rock wool cubes. If you're doing undercurrent, you say you're doing undercurrent, right? But if somebody's in soil using bags of Grow More and spraying Eagle 20, they're calling it living soil. So there's people that are taking a lot of liberties with the word living soil right now. And I think that's part of the problem, actually. So, living soil is becoming a popular buzzword, and so people are trying to jump on that train, which I think leads to some of the confusion.
Yeah, 100% agreed. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that I will tell you right now, it is not living soil. And if it is, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. And I'm definitely a believer in living soil. And, I come from a really qualified hydroponic background. One of my main mentors was a guy named Randall. And he built a facility called Candescent. And regardless of how you feel about Candescent or what they did, they were the first to have the most flower on the shelf in the entire state of California, which is most people's goal. They're trying to dominate those markets. And so, I came up in what I would assume is a similar type and quality of hydroponic culture and success of what you were doing in the Bay Area. And just most of my connections were in SoCal, so it was all hydroponic. Like, I didn't meet any real NorCal organic people till like 2014, 2015. And, the organic people that I met growing up, there's only like 2 dudes the entire time that I met that did organics. And it was for the passion, it was for the hobby, and they definitely were not paying the bills. So in my, inner circle and culture of hydroponics that I came up in, we were plain and simple, we were making fun of those guys. And so when I found Dr. Elaine and started getting into living soil, I started becoming one of those guys they made fun of. And I get it. There was successful organics going on in other regions. I just was not in those regions, so I didn't see it. I didn't get into my first Northern California organic farm until like 2014, 2015. And that was the first time I ever saw like truly, really legit, organics doing well and paying the bills.
Well, some of those hobby guys still grow some of the best stuff, but it's in such small batches, and it's like so much easier to control your inputs and everything else if you're growing in a small environment and a small batch. So,
which is what most people learn when they go to scale in general. And that's where a lot of our services come in handy. And we started guiding commercial farms back in 2014, started getting into the Colorado markets in 2016. I come from an agricultural family, so in those earlier years of cannabis growers getting the first opportunity to do large scales or even outdoor open acreages, comparatively, I had a lot of scale experience because I grew up in a produce brokerage office. I grew up around farmers that were doing hundreds or thousands of acres. And I guess you could say that was a lot of experience for the time. So combining that with my cannabis experience and what we knew from other hydroponic techniques, I was able to provide analytics and assistance to those farmers at that time. But basically what my mindset is, if I saw a guy take a Bubba Kush variety or OG or whatever it was, and he put it in an undercurrent system and he got a certain result, and if he put it into a Rockwell system and got a certain result, if we weren't getting those same results in organics, I personally believe that it was something that we were doing as a cultivator that was limiting the genetic potential of that plant, because clearly that plant had a certain genetic potential to do something in different systems like undercurrent, DWC. I'm not trying to name anybody by name, sorry about that. But I basically became obsessed with why is this organic system growing slower, producing less, when the same exact variety could go into another system and significantly outproduce those results. So I just became basically obsessed with what were the conditions that led to a fast-growing plant as translated to soil-based organic systems.
Well, and there's so many other things like pathogens, like hoplite and viroid. I think hoplite and viroid is the big topic right now. And you have living soil beds and you get hoplite and viroid in your soil bed. I mean, you're pretty fucked.
Well, I would actually disagree, because that's where living soil gives its greatest advantage in the regulated market, because you bring in these functions of nature that humans can't just do, right? So one of the main advantages of living soil is that these biological creatures do all these magical things for us when we put them into the right situation and conditions. So what we learned from Dr. Lane Ingham is that when the plant has proper nutritional balance and high biological activity, all these other different biological functions are able to be performed and problems are able to be dealt with that you don't get in a hydroponic system. So one of the interesting things about living soil is if you get to a certain point of biological activity and ratios between bacteria and things that eat bacteria and beneficial fungi, is that the plant has the ability to actually quarantine off the virus material. And sometimes what it does is it'll make like a callus. So if the branch is coming up or whatever, that virus material will get calloused off and make like a weird knuckle halfway up the branch. And then typically everything above that tends to be clean of the different virus material. And sometimes it will then coordinate off to an entire branch. So a lot of times you'll see a plant that looks pretty healthy, but then one branch will just look all dudded and shiny or, variegated or whatever it is. And, I personally believe, based on my observation of working with literally millions of square feet of regulated and unregulated cannabis, is that as our IPM choices went up in frequency, so did the virus material as well. And so back in the older days, we'd make one light application of Eagle 20. I'm not saying it was kosher or healthy or tasty or would even pass testing now, but people were doing like one single application for powdery mildew. Now people are absolutely bombarding the plants with citric acids, oils, and rubbing alcohol-based pesticides over and over and over and over. And so as somebody that creates, monitors, and provides analytics to the cannabis space, I can tell you very clearly the overlapping of trends are, dead on, right? So I think most of this virus material is because of our choices in this repetitive over and over applications of IPM, which in living soil, you can't really do that. So in order to get these high biological populations, in order to have the plant clean out its own virus material, you also can't be spraying IPM products, right? So I think all this virus boogeyman is mostly due to our current set of behaviors and cultural practices within the cannabis space, which weren't going on in prior times when this virus is not around.
So with Hoplite, I mean, what I've seen is there's guys that have it and they deal with it and it's not a big deal. They'll pull out like the dudded branches and not just Hoplite. We're talking about like Pythium and, there's so many different things. There's so many different pathogens. I mean, and there's some that, they don't do a lot, and there's some that definitely like Hoplite that is definitely affecting people. But I see some grows where guys have it and it doesn't really affect them, or it affects branches, and then they give clones to another guy, and then it just decimates the whole facility.
Yeah. So I would argue again that there's still an underlying nutritional issue. So with the cultivator that only has a branch here and there that's being affected, I would say that's the hydroponic nutritional manifestation of what I was just describing from a biological standpoint. So if your mineral chemistry is on with your feeding strategy, you can, through mineral nutrition, allow the plant to do the same type of virus cleaning of its plant material. And that would be the guy that has just one branch kind of go duddy and you cut it off and they're not that affected by it. But if you've got somebody that their entire crop gets decimated by the viruses, I bet you paychecks that if you analyze their reservoir, it's all out of whack, right? So probably way too high in nitrogen, not near the amount of calcium, and probably way too much potassium. So kind of what's happened just through experiential evidence or observational science, which I think legacy cannabis growers are experts in making a way without data and analytics. They just started tweaking the recipes until it worked right. Mm-hmm. And I think what kind of ended up is, long story short, you end up with low levels of calcium, high levels of potassium and phosphorus, which leads to a more stable substrate, so that as you're not managing water content of that root zone, you still get stability of the nutrients and you don't get an uneven stacking, as they would say, which creates maybe short spindly plants, low yields, or can be buggy problems. So that's why crop steering is so influential right now, because the yield increases significant when you start to actually manage the water content in that substrate properly to be able to stack those nutrients in a way that's productive.
Right.
So under that type of water chemistry, when you're running significantly deficient calcium, high levels of phosphorus and potassium, and always nitrogen usually, you will get the yield, you will get the bag appeal, you will get the potency and the quality, but there's typically going to be some sort of susceptibility, depending on the variety and context, I guess. If your environment's good or not good, you tend to get either powdery mildew or mite issues. And then how we start to control those mite and mildew issues, I believe, is where this virus material started to come in, because most of the consulting that we do splits into two basic groups. Those that just had catastrophic crop loss in the regulated market that are trying to find a way around it, or those that are doing quite well and are trying to find peak performance. So we don't really work with a lot of like middle ground. We're working with after everything went to hell, or those that are respected, doing quite well, and they're trying to get an extra edge. And in that journey, we've done a tremendous amount of analytics of, I guess we say, problems that arise. And then the first thing that I do is start taking the data points. So analyze the reservoir, check out the environment, things like that. And these very consistent patterns reveal themselves when virus material is more common, I guess we could say. But the reason why I'm such a fan of living soil is that nature has a solution for these things. And that's, kind of hard to wrap your mind around. But what we see experientially is if you take a plant with high levels of virus material in it and you put it into a properly balanced soil from a chemistry standpoint, and then you get the biological activity up to and above the minimum thresholds defined by Dr. Lane's work, the plant now has other abilities to deal with problems. So if there is virus material in that plant, it either shuttles it to one branch and then that branch looks like shit, or it'll form like a callus around a certain point and then everything above it grows clean. So I would assume that those people in your network that you know that the viruses aren't a problem are likely running more ideally balanced nutrient solutions. And you can also do this from a nutritional management standpoint. You just have to be dialed in on your nutritional management. If you're not dialed in on your nutritional management and you're running deficient in calcium, or what I would define as deficient in calcium, high in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, those plants from a mechanism of nutrition are going to be more susceptible to that virus material decimating. I think that's why that happens. Mm-hmm. Or not, I would say the data we've observed shows that's really why it's happening. So I believe that you absolutely can clean up virus material through hydroponic means. I think just industry-wide, by and large, most people aren't, we'll say, specifically analyzing what they're feeding, to know what these targets and ratios are. I think a lot of people just get really good at running a brand, so to speak, like within reasonable ranges. But then from harvest to harvest, sometimes there's fluctuation, and those fluctuation in results, I would say, is coming from a fluctuation in the products you're using. Mm-hmm. But most people aren't doing, most people aren't analyzing their fertilization, basically.
Interesting.
So, yeah, pretty crazy.
Let's talk about Crescive Soil, what you guys do. You and Sarah are, pretty booked up, and you have a group as well of people that you work with.
Yeah, we do. We've worked with quite an interesting mix of people along the way. Like I said, I come from a hydroponic world. I'll still periodically pick up hydroponic farms, not very often anymore. I'm really selective at this point. But to me, I just want to see anybody that's been doing it stay in it. And so along the way, I've been able to help some pretty well-respected hydroponic names, mostly from like procedural standpoints. So you can take somebody that was world famous in the legacy markets, they're still new to the regulated process, right? So one of the main ways I help some of the, salt-based farmers is just managing the regulated aspect and, keeping from test fails. We also help people with the analytics of what they're feeding or fertilizing. In the living soil world, I'd like to think that we were a major influential part in one of the reasons why it's popular, because my wife and I were the first people to put the analytics to the process. So what's interesting is, like I said, I come from a very data-driven, kind of almost militant hydroponic culture, that was very strict in their behavior and dealings and how they did things. And then when I got into organics, everybody wants to be like, and that just ain't good for me. And in the hydroponic world, there are data and analytics that you can do. You can measure your environment. You can manage VPD. You can, if you have the tools available, measure the water content of your substrate. And in organics, when I started to follow Dr. Lane and take her courses, and I met nobody really for years that was doing any level of analytics. You'd meet the random person here or there that would do the occasional soil chemistry analysis, and that, basically I'm an obsessor. I'll stay up all night thinking about stuff. And by taking data points, it allowed me to sleep at night. And so that was basically what we offered to the organic cultivators in the regulated space. Was we would come into a legal facility that either recently had a problem or was afraid of having a problem, and we'd take a bunch of soil chemistry, we'd do a lot of biological assessment, organize that into some sort of digestible format, and then present it to the farmers so that they could act on that. And in the case of living soil, if you start doing a biological assessment of your facility, either from corner to corner or rows or whatever, it starts to reveal a picture of where the problems are starting from, basically. And from our viewpoint, we've done so many of these analysis of farms of all size. There's some very clear patterns from my standpoint. So basically what we do is try to direct the farm through data to change their procedural, what we would call cultural practices. So how they water, how they dispense nutrients, how they do teas or don't do teas or what have you, and try to streamline that into a process or package that leads to desirable numbers on these various tests. And once you do that in living soil, most of, if not all, the problems go away, which I realize is a pretty bold statement, but that's really the truth of it. If you're doing a microscope assessment of your soil and managing behavior based on those results, powdery mildew is the easiest thing to remove from your facility. It's a pretty clear percentage and the ratio between what we call oomycetes and what we would categorize as beneficial fungi. So if you manage your watering, manage your techniques to reduce those levels, then powdery mildew is not really a thing, which I know is a pretty bold statement, but that's how it goes.
Well, so VPD is like, so going from like the legacy market as a legacy grower, and then all of a sudden you're approached with these VPD numbers. I think for a lot of us that have been growing for 30 years, you always had your humidity below 50%, which is almost the exact opposite of what you want to do if you're cultivating correctly. But it's a scary thing, you know?
It's terrifying to most people. Yeah. Having high humidity, because we associate powdery mildew with high humidity, which is a reasonable concern, you know. And the first time I ever saw the VPD as a concept was one of the guys that I would define as my mentors was a pretty solid grower, and he had some equipment fail. And they were, you know, Bubba Kush, 60-degree room. I mean, they were subcooling the shit out of their buildings. And some of his equipment broke, and all of a sudden he was like mid 80s and high humidity. And towards the end of harvest, he like brought us into this room. He's like, "You guys check this out." And that was the biggest nugs any of us have ever seen. We're like, "What are you doing in here?" He's like, "I don't know. The equipment broke and I just went with it." Just kind of like through the hand of God, put him into like the VPD, you know, the green on the chart or whatever. I don't know. And that was mind blowing to me, because that entire group there was, you know, like I said, they were growing Bubba Kushes and, you know, trying to get it to 60 or whatever they were doing. And to walk into a room that was like 83 degrees, 80% humidity, we were just mind blown that it was still working.
I think we can attribute some of the increases in yields to actual VPD adjustments. I mean, I would say that's one of the biggest changes over the last, 15 years, where we were excited. That's when we went from getting 2 pounds of light on a 4x4 to getting 3 or more.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and it's crazy how these like little incremental changes of being able to use data to guide your process. Now, I don't like to make data or analytics like the only holy thing. You still have to, I still believe that the farmer is the best calibrated tool, right? But what's happening with VPD is, so they call it the vapor pressure deficit, which basically is there's a differential between the osmotic pressure on the outside of the leaf and on the inside of the leaf. So in hydroponic systems, that's essential for drawing water nutrients through the plant out through the leaves on transpiration, which is how you fill up fat flowers, basically. So when we were keeping it below 50% humidity, we might have been mitigating powdery mildew, but in a rock wool or cocoa or other hydroponic techniques, you're limiting the plant's ability to transpire, which is basically sweating. And that's how they move nutrients. They are literally moving nutrients through, I guess, a change in osmotic pressure between, I guess you could say, all the way from the root zone up and out the leaves. And that's how all that humidity gets into the air, is because the water movement is bringing the nutrients to the highest growth tip. And so that's why sometimes in a hot corner, you got some spider mites, because that difference in temperature that's maybe slightly hot is affecting this vapor pressure deficit, and it seems to impact calcium the most. And as you start to have calcium deficiency, you run into mite issues often. Typically, too much nitrogen will produce powdery mildew issues. Not enough calcium will start to be more of like a mite pest issue. So,
yeah, and if you're making seeds, you want to run high nitrogen. So
exactly, because seeds are made of nitrogen, right? So yeah, that makes sense. When you said that in our little group, that kind of blew my mind. Like, I never even thought about that. But we use seed in our composting because it's high in nitrogen. So I didn't even think about that. That was a pretty interesting little tidbit.
Yeah. So you had some diagrams that you wanted to share with the group.
Oh yeah, let's do that. So I guess I'm really big on slideshows and Keynote. I like to show visual examples.
Yeah, you have some good ones too. You absolutely have some good ones. Yeah,
I think I do. So let me try and give a couple. So this is to answer the question as to why your living soil may not be working the way that you want to. And so one of the main concepts that I think is actually the biggest barrier to success in living soil biologically driven systems is something called ecological succession. So ecological succession is the scientific term for what nature is doing on an ecosystem. So it starts at bare rock, or what they would call primary ecosystem. So lava flow, flood, whatever. And then it starts to what they call early successional grasses, shrubs and small trees, the other type of trees, and then eventually an old growth forest. And this progression would be called ecological succession. And what people completely are missing, I believe, in all areas of cultivation, whether it's carrots, tomatoes, or cannabis, is that as this ecological succession takes its process on, and plants get more diverse as you go, the biological system that supports these various systems becomes more complex and actually starts to change. So over here in a primary ecosystem, you have mostly, or if not all, bacteria. You start to get a little bit of fungi, which are these orange dots, as you move higher in succession. And when you get finally to an old growth forest, you start to actually have more fungi than bacteria. And I think this is one of the reasons why there was such success had when people went into the forests of Humboldt and Mendocino and Northern California and plopped their plants in. You were plopping it into this system. And as cannabis got more and more legal, we cleared these trees out, and all this system kind of fell apart. And based on the work of Dr. Lane and the stuff that I've seen, you could generally put cannabis into this range. So if you're relying on packaged bacteria products, you're over here. If you're not using any sort of compost that legitimately has the proper quantities and ratios of biological organisms, which we would term biologically complete compost, or Dr. Lane's trademark term of biocomplete compost. Biocomplete and biologically complete just means that your compost is taking into consideration these other organisms that need to be in there. So basically what happens is, if cannabis evolved on the planet in this type of ecosystem, and from a biological standpoint, your system is only providing this bacteria, you're not supporting this system with any of the things that it's accustomed to. And that basically is the cascade of events that leads to pests, slow growth, and what have you. The most common pest in living soil people call thrips. Susan Wainwright would argue that it's not always thrips, but whatever the specificity of it, the bug that leaves little shiny holes in the leaves that drive living soil growers nuts. 100% of the time I've analyzed the biological assessment of a soil that is claiming to have thrips is way over here. And what I would assert that to is, without this level of biological activity, nutrients are not being delivered to that plant at a rate that's fast enough that equals the demand on growth we're putting on this plant with high intensity lighting, short life cycles, fast flips, and all that stuff. So in order for living soil to have the growth rates proper, you need to be, you got to at least get into this first realm. And once you start to get basically what we would define as nutrient cycling, which is happening over here, most of your problems start to go away. Pretty heroic things start to happen over here. And those would be the situations that most people don't talk about and what we would define as fish stories. Because when you do try to talk about them, people just interrupt you with your line, right? So, but if you get into this range, pretty magical things start to happen. And from a soil chemistry standpoint, that's actually one of the bigger issues, because most people aren't looking at this. The people that design your soil don't seem to care as much as they should, I think. And so chemistry in the soils we're working with is wacky as can be. So from a general standpoint, a healthy soil, so an actual soil, whether that's native soil or potting soil that you've manufactured, should have somewhere roughly around 68 to 72% of that mineral being calcium, somewhere between 10 and 14% of that mineral nutrition as magnesium, and somewhere between 4 and 7% as potassium. If we go and look at a maybe say like Fox Farms or something, it's going to have this breakdown. It's going to be like 50, 40, and 20. If you look at any of the dry mineral top dress products that we like, and a lot of them are great products, but the problem is if they put this much calcium into the mix, the three numbers on the bag would be 000 because you diluted the potassium so low. So at best, you get 10% calcium and like 5 to 7% potassium because nobody is going to go into the store and buy a 000. So it's not, I don't know. But basically what happens is if you buy any of the prepackaged mineral dry top dress products and rely on those for your mineral nutrition in a soil-based system, every time you add them to your soil, you are maintaining this same dysfunctional mineral chemistry balance. And it doesn't really take any sort of scientist to realize that if this is what the plant needs to see in your soil-based system, and this is what you're getting, there's going to be some problems. So the consequence of this mineral chemistry over here is you have a functional deficiency in calcium. Some advisors would argue that 80% of the plant's biomass requires calcium. And magnesium in cannabis is a yield and quality killer. So once you get above, let's say 20% magnesium, you start to significantly impact bag appeal, yield, frost, potency, things like that. And when you start to get a significant quantity of potassium, you're creating weak and watery cells because the way that the plant wants to build a cell is it brings calcium up into that plant and it builds the main structure of that cell with calcium. It starts to fill it with all the other stuff. If you're filling it with potassium, or rather, if there's a deficiency of calcium, the plant can substitute it with potassium to keep its life cycle moving, but you're now creating a cell filled with an electrolyte, which potassium is an electrolyte, which creates a weak, watery cell, which is kind of what I was talking about earlier about how under this condition of high potassium and low calcium, in a way, you're making your plants more susceptible to really any problem, and especially some of the virus material. And these are some pictures. This is my wife here. She's like 5'1", I think, 5'2", something like that. This was a project we did in 2018. When I met my wife, she was living in Utah, was not around any cannabis cultivation at all. And so when we started consulting together in 2014, I had all the cannabis experience. So she would do the microscope assessment, and I would basically handle all the cannabis related functionality. And so by 2018, she had done so much consulting with me that she was becoming her own little cannabis official, I guess. And so this was a project in 2018 with two cultivators we had worked 2 years prior to that. There's a guy named Sean, used to go by Push Farms. And Sarah led this entire project without me. So I just kind of took pictures and hung out. But this was kind of like Sarah's senior project of cannabis, and she led all the fertilization, all the stuff. I just kind of hung out. But basically what you're looking at is this is our control. So we like to try and maintain a control anytime we're trying to do research. And so this is seed plants dug into a hole and just planted. There was no soil prep. There was no biological treatments. These plants did receive the same fertilization. They did receive the same foliar feeding, but they didn't receive any biological treatments. We just dug a hole.
Native soil? Native soil.
100%. Yeah. Wow. This is native soil. And obviously there's some like weird gaps here because like we said, we were trying to keep this as a control. This was at the top of one of the plots. And so we didn't get like a full planting density, obviously. We were mostly looking at plant growth, response, yield potential, and whatnot. But if you were to take this size plant and do proper planting density, do proper row count per acre, you'd end up somewhere around 1,000. You might get maybe 1,200 pounds per acre or something like that. And at this time in 2017, 2018, most of the farmers that were hiring us for broad acre scale work, their main goal was like if they've got 1,200 to 1,500 pounds per acre, they would feel pretty good about themselves. If they had 2,000 pounds per acre, they would be stoked, right? So just kind of as a visual size, this might get you about 1,000 pounds per acre at a proper planting density and row structure. Over here on this side, these are the same genetics, same seeds, same grower, same cultivator, same property. But this row got what's called a yeoman plow. So the plow does a deep rip that goes about 30 inches deep, and it breaks up the compaction. And we hooked up a compost extract tank that would inject compost extract deep down into that hole. So basically what we were doing is we were breaking up the agricultural compaction, and we made sure that the top 30 inches of soil were properly inoculated with biology. And then once we transplanted, we did another compost extract treatment, and I believe they received 2 more in the course of this thing. So both are coming from the same seed stock, same breeders, same crew, same cultivator, same fertilization, same foliar feeding, same canopy management. This one was just plopped into a hole. This one got up to, what we would call, let me see here, go back up to this guy. So from a biological standpoint, they got into this range, right? Yeah. And that's the difference. So plants on the left, it's this range. Plants on the right are kind of maybe this range, I guess you could say. There was kind of a bit of obstacles at this type of scale. It gets really hard to do everything. There was some significant budget constraints on this property. So we weren't able to do everything that we wanted, but nonetheless, there's a significant change in plant growth. And on this side, they ended up with 4,000 pounds per acre of jarable flower. I have some COAs somewhere on my computer, but they were all 26 to 28% THC, highly desirable outcome. And so, when you said living soil kind of struggles, this is the image I think you had in your head. Mm-hmm. And then when I heard it, this is the image I have in my head. It was like, well, when you're truly doing living soil, that's, it looks a little bit different. And that's what most people are kind of unaware of. And I think that's one of the biggest issues with just kind of the organic culture. And I gotta be really careful when I say this, because I don't want to be inflammatory or I'm not trying to say this trying to be a jerk, but there's some significant cultural differences between the hydroponic world and the organic living soil world. And in the living soil world, results are less important, right? So if you go to like Jungle Boys on Instagram, they're not like writing you poetry and stuff. They just put a picture of their grow and says, I forget, double diamond cookies, June 2023. You know what I'm saying? This is what I did today. You know what I mean? Like they're not even necessarily talking about what they did, or they're not giving you recipes. They're just like, yo, this is what I did, And like, if you go to the organic world, and especially the living soil world, the community is the most valuable thing. Being non-threatening is the most important thing. Supporting the gurus is the most important thing, I guess we could say.
Right.
In hydroponics, nobody cares about that shit. And where I came from, like, you weren't even allowed to say I read on the internet. You would get slapped like a meme or something. They'd be like, get out of here, kid. You know what I mean? It was like, if you started a sentence with I read on the internet, they'd be like, nope, not here, player. And they'd be like, go apply it to your garden, bring the flower, we'll smoke it. And if it's worth the shit, we'll talk about what you read on the internet. Like, it was so disallowed almost violently. And in the organic world, we just have this echo chamber of things that don't work, have not worked, have never worked, are probably never going to work. But everybody wants to be part of the community talking about these things, right? And so, especially if you're just like a normal grower trying to decipher how to take a pathway into living soil, and your only outlet for information is Instagram or some of the forums, it is extremely difficult to truly be successful, I think. And, especially because the predominant narrative in living soil, the ironic part about it is there's a lot of really loud voices that try to silence anybody talking about quantifying biology. Mm-hmm. And I think, part of that is by design. The other major difference is, I worked for a hydroponic organization, very massive, very well known. You definitely know who they are, and you definitely know their investors. This was 2018, and they hired me for the value I could provide to their farm. But at the same time, they had a lobbyist on the organic regulation board for California called OCal to make it more difficult for organic cultivators, right? So in 2018, and I would say, so we're working with the first indoor farm to be OCal certified. I've worked with literally hundreds of organic farms. none of them know anything about, they don't even know it's called OCal. But you go to the hydroponic world or the chemical world, they have lobbyists making it more difficult for the organics, right? And I don't want to go too much more down that rabbit hole sounding like a kook, but that's another major issue is there's people from different areas of chemical agriculture that infiltrate misinformation in order to make it difficult for you to be successful. So if you don't have any commercial connections, like I know like if there's something going on, popular trend, I'd be like, hey, James, what do you think about this thing's going on? I'd be like, yeah, no, that's a pay to play. I don't think they're really doing it. That's a sponsor deal. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
It's, but in the organic world, there's a tremendous amount of effort on these pay to plays. I've worked for some of these farms. I kind of take a major stance to not do any of those anymore. If I'm working with a farm that's just doing something to promote a product, I usually don't mess with those kind of people. I need you to be about what you're doing and not just taking a sponsorship deal. People don't realize, in NASCAR, the sticker's on the car. In cannabis, the sticker's not on the car, right? There's still sponsor deals. There's still stuff, right?
Imagine these guys though with jackets in cannabis. It'd be kind of goofy.
I think what would be funny is to see the organic gurus with a Syngenta sticker on their back, right?
Yeah.
Because that's definitely a deal. But so, for the commercial cultivators that have commercial connections, it's a little bit easier because you're in a certain community. And I think to a certain point, if you get to a certain scale and you've made it this far, you're able to discern on your own if a new trend is going to be real or not, right? Like if somebody popped up some new hydroponic trend, you have enough personal experience to go, yeah, I don't think that's going to shake out. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
right. And so 100%, right? So, but most of your average living soil people don't have that. And a large majority of the people getting into living soil are coming from other areas of agriculture. And that's most of my clientele.
Yeah.
I get a lot of flack for that from people in the living soil community. But again, I'm here because I came from a qualified crew. I was not the lead grower. I was not the facility owner. I was the guy that did data and analytics and helped people be in business. Way back when I was calculating kilowatt hours, I was helping people manage, I just was the nerdy math guy in the group. And so as legalization continued forward, that's still my role. And so I'm here because I'm trying to keep people with cannabis experience in the cannabis game. And so if you previously did cocoa core, drain to waste, or hydroponic, whatever, and you want to now do living soil, I'm probably going to help you do that, And again, like if you're just trying to succeed with your GrowLink system and rock wool, sometimes I'll still help you too, right? And I think for the new entrants to the market, so to speak, good luck deciphering what's shared on Instagram or whatever. It's a real good way to go out of business. And right now there's some really popular trends that are the swiftest way to end your career in cannabis, by following what they're talking about on the internet. And, I used to kind of try to be a little more vocal to try and stop some of those things. I've just gotten out of the way of that train. I just kind of work privately behind the doors almost exclusively. Right. And so, I just don't even bother anymore. Which again, that's why I was here. I want to be an educator. We used to do presentations and workshops. We don't really do those anymore. I think one of the last ones I did was probably with you and Black Sheep. I think I maybe done one since then. But now we do classes. So now we have what we call master classes where, we work with 4x4 tent growers. We've got a couple other commercial farms that go through our master classes, but basically we've distilled down the full complexity of our consulting work into 5 and 8 week modules where we meet through Zoom like this, and we have a private forum, and we meet once a month with all members, which is what you came to. So you came to and was really our first guest speaker to our monthly meetings, which was pretty badass. People are just raving about that show, dude. That was cool.
You have a great group too, I think.
I do, yeah.
A lot of passionate people. And, it's the 4-light growers. If you're growing 4 lights, you're passionate about it. It's not about money anymore. There's no way. So, it's a beautiful thing seeing people really growing with, 4 lights or even 1 light, in a 4x4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes that's where the greatest innovation comes from, actually. And so at the same time, we were working with some of the largest farms on the planet, literally by definition, and at the same time still doing one-on-one consulting calls for 4-light growers, single tank growers. And a lot of times, some of the most interesting things of innovation are coming from those little 2x4s and just, nobody from the industry that just comes up with a different angle or some random product from their hardware store or something. And sometimes a lot of the most interesting things come from those smaller growers. But in years past, our business was not set up to help those smaller growers. And that was kind of some of the flack we got from the living soil industry is, they thought we were just helping some of the biggest farms, which that's just what I like to do. Like I came from, some legitimate, company back in the day. And, two of my cousins that are like my brothers went on to be NASCAR crew chiefs. Like, I'm not trying to be third place. Like, I want to be in the biggest stadiums. I want to have the biggest impact. I want to do the coolest shit. And so that took us to just that's just what I like. But what I like now, we're still doing those jobs, but now we've got a functional format for the smaller growers, or even now, hell, everybody's pinched on money right now. And so we're helping some commercial farms in our master classes because it's a minor fraction of what our personal consulting costs. And actually, we just had our first student win a cup. So we've been working with cup winners since day one. We now just had our first student, and he won the Emerald Cup, and he won a High Times Cup. I'm not sure which one, but he just won a and so that's for hemp flower. So he's got I think about 6,000 square feet of greenhouse in Illinois. His name's Justin. His brand's called Stony Branch.
Who would have thought Illinois? Illinois is great.
Right?
It's not the last place I think they grow good cannabis, but it's not the first place, that's for sure. And I mean, I have my friend Rick Mosca from Mosca Negra, and there's people crushing it in Illinois, and all over the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the trippy part about this last couple of years. Like, they're popping up all over the place, man. Like, you'd never think, man. Especially us from California, you from the Bay, me from, basically San Fernando Valley, Orange County, San Diego, like some real players came from that zone. So it's hard to think, someday someone from Illinois is going to crush it. You're like, yeah, right. We got it. Thanks.
Or Utah. So the highest THC tested autos, I have some of mine that have tested above 30% for auto flower, and this is grown at scale. And this is not an average, but this is individual plants testing above 30. Sure. That was in Utah.
Get out of here.
Who would have thought?
Yeah.
So
that's where I live now. I never thought I'd end up in Utah. And we haven't been involved with any of the farms around here. We had a client from California that applied, and Utah is it's like one of the most good old boy places, kind of New Yorky or something. And they assigned like 9 or 12 licenses. I think our client got like 15th out of, I think they only signed 9 or something, but I think they're all hydroponic farms too. I don't think they awarded any organic farms at all.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting how that works here. But I like living here. But yeah, the weed sucks. So
gotta grow your own.
Yeah, I don't know, man. We do so much Zoom, and we're so high profile. Man, I'm terrified to light my house up. But
I'll never not have a plant in my backyard. never. It's always it's like I made some seeds in my backyard. I just like having plants around.
I know. I'm with you, dude. It's hard for me. I mean, I've scalped all kinds of bedrooms to keep going in the back. And when we lived in Northern California, I was able to do the first full term outdoor, which was cool. I've only done 3 outdoor runs because I only lived there for 3 years. But yeah, this is the snitch state. So you got to be real careful. People don't even talk about smoking weed here. It's pretty sketchy. So right now I'm doing chickens. I got a chicken coop, and I'm going to do some selective breeding.
Nice.
So I'm applying the principles of cannabis to my chicken coop, and that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully someday I'll be able to sneak a plant. I'm only been here 1 year. I'm a little nervous,
Right.
So, yeah.
Just got to grow some CBG or CBD.
I know, right? Just out in the backyard, all boom.
Big old 12-footer. Yeah.
We live up against the mountain, and we get legitimate like 70-mile-an-hour winds coming off the mountain into the back of our house. And we set up a garden that blows down the street. So I ordered a little 2x2 light for Sarah, and we're going to set up a little tomato inside the kitchen by the front door. So I'm going to grow a tomato plant for her inside, because that poor Sarah, that outdoor garden just keeps blowing down the street. Like, we can't even hardly. It's crazy.
So I got a question for you. Where do you see the industry in the next 5 years and in the next 10 years?
From what aspect?
From where we're at now, from where we were before to where we're at now, as far as companies, quality, where do you see the genetics going? You think more people will be going to scale? Are we going to have less indoor and more greenhouse supplemental lighting, which I kind of think is the perfect environment?
Yeah, I love light depth greenhouse. It's kind of the best of both worlds. We work with a lot of indoor growers, and it's hard to say how long economically that's going to pan out. I think there's some brands that will always be around regardless of economics, right? So I've worked with some of those grows that their brand will carry on. I know this one guy, Sam, he's the lead cultivator of a farm in Northern California. I think they're the largest permit holder in Northern California, something like that. But he said his analytic team made the claim that here in the next year or so, the only flower in the state of California that's going to maintain an eighth price over $50 will be a living soil grown, aside from the cookies, those handful of brands that will always maintain that, which is pretty interesting to me. I've done a lot of economics for all types of farms. That's part of what I do for my consulting. I also have a business degree and the weed knowledge, so I'm able to sit at the table with the grower and the business guys. I do a lot of spreadsheet analytics, forecasting, things like that. So I know all the economics, the cost of production and things like that. And, back in 2018, everybody was kind of saying, or even really 2016, 2017, a lot of people were kind of professing you need to be below 600, below 400 all in cost per pound. And in like 2018, people were still like 890, 920, nowhere near that. I think you can get that with any cultivation style, but you have to be on point. And I think what I see shaking out is regardless if you're growing hydroponics or regardless if you're growing living soil, if you're not data driven in some way, you still need to be an artist, you still need to be a cultivator. But if you're not measuring your process, I don't think you're going to survive. Right. Whether you're legacy or legal, because it's getting down to, and I was having this conversation yesterday with one of my classes. It's like, when pounds were $4,000, you could afford to cut a crop down if it went sideways. You could afford to scrub a room down. You could afford to shut down.
You could afford to not look at your numbers.
You could, and more importantly, nailed it on the head. You could afford to not even care about financials. And I say this in the most loving way possible, but most of us were very sloppy financial, myself included. Like I still barely manage my finances the way I should, even though that's part of my job, helping people keep their money straight. And cannabis made me sloppy with my profitability, so to speak. And if you're not, I think at a basic level, if you start with all the things you can quantify, if you're not analyzing what you're feeding every harvest, I don't think you're going to make it, because you don't know why things go sideways and you don't know why things go well. If somebody comes to me, it's usually when things aren't going well and then they start taking a data point. You're like, okay, great. You now have a numerical assessment of not good. Mm-hmm. When things are going well, you need to analyze that so that you can at least get back to it. And that's how I learned what these targets were. Well, things are going well. Let's send an analysis of our fertilization recipe to Wallace Labs, for example, in El Segundo. They're fantastic. I think they provide the most accurate assessment of a fertilization recipe, whether that's organics or water chemistry. So I think at bare minimum, you need to be doing regular water chemistry tests because your water changes. In Denver, Colorado, half the year, your water is a 6.2 and comes from a certain water source. Another part of the year, it's 8.4 and comes from another water source. If you're pouring the same mils per gallon of your advanced nutrients or whatever in there, you're going to have one good part of the year and one bad part of the year in a really simple fashion. More important than that, no matter how much you like your products, they vary quite wildly sometimes throughout the year. And so part of the analytics I do are for products, helping them be more consistent. Like right now, Athena's really popular. I think Athena's really popular simply because they're doing some of these analytics, right? So they're trying to produce a higher quality, and I don't even necessarily care for them. I just think that's why people are jumping on it and like having a little bit more success. I think Athena's doing a little bit more due diligence, so to speak, and there's other good brands too, and CES I think has been pretty good. He's an extremely data-driven guy there, you know? So there's other brands that are good. Some of this stuff might be a 300% variation in what's in that bottle.
Yeah, so I like cutting edge. I'm a big fan of cutting edge. I'm a big fan of United. You know, there's a lot of stuff. And then, you know, Emerald Harvest, as far as organic, you know, I think they have interesting products for sure.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm not married to any one product. I'm not sponsored by anybody. I don't take endorsement money. So
No. Yeah, I don't think that even needs to be said with you. But so if you just talk about like a cost of production standpoint, so, you know, some of the larger hydroponic farms that I've worked with, you know, they come in running heavy 16, running advanced, you know, running, what was the other one? The San Fernando Valley guys. I can picture the label. I can't think of the name right now. But anyways, in 2018, that stuff was $350 a square foot nutrient input cost per harvest. Most things have gone up 40 to 50 to 100%. So I'd say in 2023, if you're running heavy 16, advanced, you know, any of those, you're probably $3, $4, maybe $5 a square foot nutrient input cost. I know CES is a little bit cheaper, but if you talk about like general hydroponics, you're probably $250 per square foot.
If you're using FloraPro, I think FloraPro's a little cheaper. You know, you're using some salts. FloraPro's actually a pretty good product if we're talking, you know, something that's a 2-part, that's a salt mix. You know, I've used it for seed production, and I basically will try anything. I love, especially for seed production, I love trying different things and seeing what kind of results I get. You know, we hit the mark the other day when we harvested at over 45,000 seeds per 4x4. That's crazy. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
That's crazy.
So back when I started, if you would have told me those are the kind of numbers we could get, I would have really strived a lot harder to get those numbers.
Right? It's like the 4-minute mile. Nobody strove for it. They didn't know it was possible, you know, and I think that's the best part about legalization, and it brought stuff out into the open. And I think it gave people something to chase. You know, there was all those little pockets of dudes crushing it. And once you got to be able to put it on Instagram, I think it's like the 4-minute mile. It's like, wow, I can do that.
Yeah.
You know, but if you're not measuring these things, you're gonna struggle to stay relevant, whether you're well financed or not. And you know, one of the things that I do is I help transition people from bottles to just bag salt formulations. So you can go from like, you know, $3, $4, $5 a square foot down to $1 a square foot and get the same production, or sometimes better if you're balancing the NP and K and all that stuff. Living soil comparatively. So my full program, Guild, you know, push to the max, push an industry leading quality, you know, it's like $1.20 a square foot all in. Yeah. And so you compare that to the absolute lowest price bag salt, which is about $1 right now. And, you know, you're $2, $3, $4 a square foot. It's not going to take very long for Living Soil to get a significant advantage over that just from your reoccurring costs, you know? And
and it pays for itself, right? So like over time, absolutely pays for itself. Your investment is initial, right? So like in your soil, and then as you go, it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper.
Yeah. I think both can be managed though, but like if you're in that $2, $3, $4 a square foot, you probably better take a look at that moving into the future. And more importantly, you can't afford to have one fall off. Like you need to know why you had a 20% loss on this run, you know? You need to know why that's happening, you know?
5 years from now, where do you see the industry?
My honest answer?
Yep.
I see the only people still able to cultivate, whether it's legacy or regulated, are those people that are incorporating the available analytic tools and the tools to guide your cultivation process. I'm not saying we're not going to be artists anymore. I'm not saying the cultivator is not the best thing anymore. But I'm saying if you're not analyzing your water, if you're not analyzing your feed every time you buy nutrients, you just will not make it. I think just that's a broad statement that if you're not, you know, if you're in hydroponics and you're not measuring volumetric water content, you're going to get smoked by the people that are. Absolutely smoked. And you can buy little handheld meters. You don't need to buy some like crazy GrowLink stuff. You can buy a handheld meter just like a pH pen. And in the living soil world, you're not going to make it if you're not paying attention to soil chemistry numbers, because the people that are producing soil aren't hitting the numbers for you. They're just not. And if you're not paying attention to the biological numbers, you're going to have slow growth, poor production. So they're not going to make it. And, with all the tools that are available to now, even TrollMaster, GrowLink, Arroyo, like things have changed in the last couple of years. Like with these faux lights and the grow links and just all these analytical tools, man, it's got me scratching, trying to light up another room, just be like, I want to use these tools, And I'm not saying you got to go spend a bunch of money to be productive, but if you're not starting with a $90 water test, or even Logan Labs can do a $40 water test, if you're not starting there, you're not going to be able to build a foundation to remain relevant. And I see that. I mean, I've worked with straight up famous people, like to no names. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're famous. It doesn't matter if you're running a 2x4. I do these analytics. A $68 soil test always comes back in profitability and yield in a 4x4 tent. Always. And people look at these numbers like an obstacle. So if you look at the cost of doing business as an obstacle, I don't think you're going to make it.
Right.
You have to figure out. I'm not saying blow money. That's the other thing we're great at as we guys, is just like throwing money at problems. I'm not saying that. But like if you look at from a scarcity mindset that your pie is shrinking and you say, I get this every day, I can't afford a $68 water test. I can tell you, as somebody with a finance degree that does economics for the cannabis industry, that return on investment comes out of a 4x4 tent. So if you're in any size commercial facility and you're not doing that every harvest, you're not going to make it. You're going to get blown by the people that are. And a lot of those people are new entrants, and that's what kind of sucks. Like, I come from these, pedigrees, and there's less and less people with experience as I go, and that bums me out. But the reality is this market's going to move on with or without you. And if you're stuck in this position, unwilling to move to this next requirement of you, you're going to get left behind regardless of who you are. And I think that goes for everybody. And that's why you are where you are, because in your world, you're doing that. You're one of the most data-driven hydro dudes I've met. There's only one other guy I can think of that does similar type things to you, and he would be considered world famous like you, And there's a lot of other people that get good at managing genetics, managing process, managing employees, having a good out, having a good market far away. That's all fine, but if your strategy is to ship it to Virginia, like that market is shrinking, you maybe got one more year for that. So
if that, yeah.
If that, like that's wrapping up pretty quick. And it's just simply because I think that goes back to the Eagle 20 talk of why that is the consumer's tired of ringing ears, tingling tongues, and burning throats.
Yeah.
And a lot of the legacy growers are still laying on the Eagle 20, Avid, and Floramite, and the consumer's over that. And so if that's the product you're producing, not that many people want that anymore, and they don't want to pay $35 in taxes for an eighth or whatever the hell it is right now, but it doesn't make your ears ring, doesn't make your tongue tingle. And so if you're a legacy grower that's trying to continue moving, you have to find out what's wrong nutritionally as to why you need that Eagle 20. Because in the regulated market, we figured that out. It's math. It's nitrogen levels, it's calcium quantities, it's not pushing potassium so hard. You don't need that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
So you got to put down. And now, to be fair, what I said earlier, that information is very hard to come into contact. You can't just Google this stuff. So I'm sympathetic to that obstacles. But I didn't know it before I knew it. You just got to put in the work,
right.
Or reach out to someone. I help nobodies all the time, people that nobody knows. And
sure. And I think if you're watching this and you don't know the difference between living soil as far as why it's a better product, it's the end product. In my opinion, it's the effect more than anything else. It's the effect from the living soil. You can take two cultivars, grow one with cocoa, and you're going to get good results. You grow Skittles in both. You grow any of these cultivars that are popular right now, you're going to get good results in both. But the effect, hands down, I mean, I think flavor-wise, you can get good flavor in cocoa. You can get great flavor. But the effect and the flavor, and the structure, I feel like there's something special about living soil and the way it cures out too. It's very different than stuff that's grown in other substrates.
So I think the main difference for that is, and what I would attribute to as the greatest advantage when you compare just hydroponics to any type to living soil, as the market moves forward, I think the greatest advantage is, while hydro is flushing, I'm still feeding. And we don't flush in living soil because in hydroponics, you're taking a nutrient that takes a salt and sticks it to a mineral. And that's called chelate. Chelate. It's a hard word to think of the context. But anyways, they have to stick that nutrient to something. So they stick it to a salt. So when you water that plant with that salt-based fertilizers, both those go into the plant. And then towards the end of the harvest cycle, you got to take that salt out. And so I don't know that just the salt comes out. I think you're pulling things back out in order to get that clean burning flavor. And we don't contribute anything that needs to be flushed. And it's not a good idea to flush in living soil. You create a whole nother problem. And so in those several weeks, while people are flushing, we're still pushing. And so I think that's where that added complexity comes from, and where those, I guess, whatever, the stuff that pops up on the test and things we haven't even figured out how to measure yet. I think that's the one of the main single advantages, honestly, other than stability. If you know what you're doing with living soil and you're quantifying these things, it's very resilient. If you're not paying attention to the microbial population, it feels like a shit show,
Yeah.
So
it's that extra buffer. Yeah. As far as a cultivator, you do get buffer from soil as opposed to rock wool.
Yeah. Yeah. But you can do some great things in those. I'm not at all, like I said, I'm working with a 30,000 square foot rock wool facility right now. I've been in the kitchen and in the laundry room of all of them, and, so I can see what's potential and what's problematic. And so that's why I doubled down so hard on living soil, is just on the powdery mildew issue. It's not an issue for us if you're managing these things. It doesn't even exist. Yeah. Usually in our consulting work, we do 4-month packages. Most farms get to the point of no powdery mildew in that first harvest. Some of them takes a little bit longer into the second harvest, but once they understand what we're teaching them and they implement it and it has that effect, even after we leave, years after, the powdery mildew doesn't come back because they continue to manage for those things. So that's another tremendous advantage. Like, we don't have a powdery mildew protocol. We don't spray nothing for it. We don't try to control it. We use math and microscope assessments to stay out of the realms of powdery mildew. Now in hydroponics, you can do that as well, but it has to do with nitrogen and calcium and potassium, and then obviously your environment. So I just think most people aren't really doing that. That's what I really enjoy the most. I'm just a math nerd,
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, if people want to hear more about what you're doing and follow your footsteps, or check everything. Oh, there we go. You make it so easy.
I Zoom all day long, dude. One of the things with COVID is I had to become a virtual assistant here. So yeah, but my website's crecivesoil.org. Like I said, coming out of the legacy markets, I was stoned one day and pick a hard to spell, hard to write word, thinking that'd make me hard to find. Had no clue by that point. They already had audio thumbprints of us all logged in the system, But anyways, my personal email is scott@crecivesoil.org if you got a specific question. Like I said, we do consulting for any size farm. We've worked with foreign governments, famous dudes, people you've never heard of, 2x4 hobbyist growers. I just like growing cannabis, man. And I like to see people have that moment. I don't care if you're a hydro grower or living soil grower. I like it when it clicks in you and we change one minor thing and everything becomes better. And there's just like something really cool about that, where it just clicks. And then my favorite thing to hear people say is, I've been growing this many years, I've never seen that from my genetics. That's my favorite thing to do. And you can do that through nutritional management, hydroponics, measuring your substrate in hydroponics, or just living soil in general done right does that as well. And that's just my favorite thing. We're getting ready to fire off another masterclass. Today's, June 2nd. I think next Friday, our next masterclass starts. We do those a few times a year where we take people through our consulting programs. I've got a mineral chemistry class coming up in July where I teach people the math on how to do their own mineral chemistry, whether you're a consultant or a hobbyist grower or a farm. It's all good. We have everybody in between in there. I think mineral chemistry is one of the biggest lacks in all of living soil. There's only a handful of dudes that are doing it. And one of my main goals right now is get way more people equipped to professionally and properly manage mineral chemistry of their soil, because that's a major issue in the whole industry, And then obviously we do the microscope. My wife teaches a microscope class, so that's the thing we've been teaching the longest. In 2013, 2014, I started teaching organic growers how to use the microscope for their needs. My wife, Sarah, now teaches a class. It's about 5 weeks long. Lasts for an entire year, but you have 5 in-person sessions and monthly meetings. And she basically sets you up through Zoom on how to use the microscope as an actual analytical tool, which I think if you're any soil-based system, if you're not incorporating the microscope assessment in any way, this is not likely to be fruitful for you moving into the future. You got to get on that, I think.
You want to talk about that a little bit more, about what you guys do under the microscope? Because I think a lot of people are curious. Exactly, is what you guys are doing under the microscope.
Yeah, so we use what's called a compound light microscope. So there's two main types of microscope: a stereo, which you look down like to look for bugs on a leaf. We use one where light shines through the bottom. You put a cover slip and look for bugs, like in science class in high school. And Dr. Lane Ingham is the person that kind of took these scientific tools and turned it into an agricultural assessment. And she, all through the 90s, early 2000s, I think by 1997, 2003, she had it dialed. She's gotten a lot of flack and a lot of resistance. I'm not saying everything that she says is right, but I would put her at the top of my list of influential people in my life. And I became qualified to guide commercial farms because of her guidance. You know, she taught me how to be a professional analyst. She taught me how to manage cultivators, basically. I was good at growing weed. Basically, working one-on-one with her taught me how to be a professional, and how to truly guide people to success, and using the microscope method to keep it to a data point. My favorite saying is we got to move it off of the emotion and onto a data point, you know, and so we take the soil, we're counting bacteria, we're counting oxygen-loving, aerobic, what I would say beneficial fungi. We're comparing those two. We're looking at the predators of bacteria. They're called protozoa, so we're counting them. And then we count nematodes, beneficial and non-beneficial, and then what we would call the anaerobic indicators, or decreased oxygen organisms. So there's like a light switch that turns on in biology. They have very specific functions under certain conditions. So when oxygen drops below 4 parts per million, a whole suite of organisms go to sleep and go to a dormant stage, and then a whole bunch of other organisms wake up and start functioning. That transition is where all disease takes place. So when you talk about Pythium, Fusarium, Rhizoctonial, I don't even care about the name. It means you're on this side of decreased oxygen and you need to address it. So there's basic patterns inside these different organism ratios. For example, powdery mildew. We did a major project in 2018 in Santa Barbara after the major fires and floods. And we had a 1-acre greenhouse full of 30-gallon pots of moms, where some had powdery mildew and some did not have powdery mildew. We went through each 2,200 square foot bay and we counted all the soil from plants that didn't have powdery mildew, and we counted all the soils from plants that were showing visible signs of powdery mildew. Through all 16 of those bays, there was a pattern within 4% of a certain ratio. So the ratio between what we call omycetes, which are water molds, powdery mildew causing basically molds, and those that are oxygen-loving aerobic organisms, there was about a 4 to 6% difference in that ratio in the plants that showed powdery mildew and those that did not show powdery mildew. And that pattern continues to be the most undeniable, consistent thing. Doesn't matter if you're growing in Zimbabwe, in the ground, or in Southern California in a back bedroom. The relationship between this thing we call omycetes and beneficial fungi determines most of the outcome. And if your threshold for powdery mildew. So that's basically how we use that microscope. We're looking for patterns, we're looking for quantities, and there's certain ranges, I guess you could say, where good things happen, and there's certain ranges where all the problems happen. And so that's what we're doing with a commercial facility. If you've been growing at a smaller scale and you now go to this any larger scale, sometimes massive scale, with the most stringent constraints ever devised for plant cultivation, not even cannabis. What you and I are doing in regulated cannabis is the most stringent production of plants on the planet, right? From what I understand,
absolutely.
Not even close, right? And the most stringent would be GMP weed for the European market, which has even stricter parameters in California. California is one of the strictest. And so when you're entering that activity, you need to be precise, right? So basically what we do is we chop up the facility, do a bunch of biological assessments, and instead of spraying for powdery mildew every plant every week, we say zone 4 is out of whack. Let's address zone 4. Everything else is fine. So we basically help people identify where their vulnerabilities are through biological means, and then usually making those slight corrections changes most things. When we first started really getting into the commercial markets in late 2016, early 2017, the only thing that I did was biological assessment and corrections, because I was not at all about to profess that I knew what to do in these 600 light rooms. Yeah, I had a great legacy, but I'm not going to try and tell people what to do at that stage. So we only did microscope assessment and made suggestions. Now, obviously, we're do full design and the whole everything. But at that point, all we were doing was biological assessment. And the people that were respected, well-known, when you tuned up that biological thing right off the bat, you get 30 to 40% more of everything. You'd get 30 to 40% faster growth rates, which led to a week less of vegetative time across the board. You'd get 30 to 40% increase in yield. You'd also get 30 to 40% increase in potency. All of these combinations would translate to also 30 to 40% reduction in costs, because you're not fighting problems, you're making more yield, increasing profit, basically. So you're never going to convince me that biology is not worth measuring. Like it's, that's the main driver of what we're doing. And so what we do, we've termed it the Crescive method for cultivation, simply because we're doing something different. And what we're doing is, any decision we make, if it affects that biological assessment negatively, it's out. And it doesn't matter what it is. There's been all kinds of things along the way that I was like, this is going to be a great idea. This is going to work great. We do it. Those biological numbers go down, or in some other ways sideways, it's out. And it doesn't matter what it is. If it's a popular trend, we put it to the test. Numbers go up, numbers go down. If it goes down, it's out. I don't care how popular it is. And that's why I think the microscope stuff gets so much resistance, because there's a lot of people trying to push stuff that's not that helpful. And within 40 minutes of a microscope assessment, you could see if that was good or bad, or, no. So that's basically what we're doing with the microscope assessment. And you can see everything. Like, my favorite example is the very first facility that ever brought us in Colorado. It was early 2016. They had 5 benches in a greenhouse, and they had 4 greenhouses identically mirrored. They'd bring plants in on a conveyor belt going from right to left. Each week, they'd bring in new plants. And all 4 greenhouses, the 2 outer sides were producing significantly more than the 3 inner rows. And they were banging their head against the wall. They're not even from the same populations. They're, just whatever it was. And so each of these 4 greenhouses, measurable yield increase on outside 2 rows, and it got less as they got towards the center. And the middle row had the least production, regardless of what week it came in or what greenhouse it was in. It was wild. So my wife and I went in there, did about 30 microscope assessments of the farm, dice it up this way, dice it up this way. Remarkable variation in biological populations from corner to corner, from group to group, that were identical in each greenhouse. And basically what was happening was, they would have a batch tank in the center of each greenhouse with a big hose reel. And once a week, they would get their predatory nematodes, which are actually bacterial feeding nematodes, which produce growth, and they cycle nitrogen and phosphorus. So the HB nematodes, Heterabditis, nematodes that we use for thrips and whatever, they're commonly used. There's SF, SC, and HB. The HB one actually eats bacteria, long story short, increases growth, even though you think you're doing it to control gnats. And so they would dump those nematodes into the tank in the center of the greenhouse. Nematodes are heavier than water. They go straight to the bottom. The pump is drawing from the bottom. So the heaviest thing goes to the first place they water. So us cannabis people like to do everything the same. So they would walk into greenhouse 1, they would stretch out the hose, go up and water the far left. Since the hose is completely stretched out, they go to the far right over here and water that one. They wheel up the hose a little bit, hit this lane, wheel it up a little bit more, hit the center. And they did that every time. What ends up happening is you end up with 1 billion nematodes over here, 1 billion nematodes over here, a third of a billion here, and none in the center. And with track and trace data, as much as people want to groan and moan and complain about it, that is extremely efficient data if you can apply it. And for the first time ever, growers were forced to get a per plant yield that's undeniable. It's not just a mashing of an average light yield. It's this corner is producing more than this corner, right? And so one of the things that we did was use that data. And if you're a commercial cultivator, you should take that track and trace data, make an overlay of your facility, and place the plant data and the yield and color code it where it's located in your building. And it will bring up a heat map of dysfunction in your facility and tell you exactly where the problems are.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's great. That's my favorite thing. Because I didn't get asked for too much stuff until a certain point of success. And then finally someone goes, what do you think we should do? And I said, I'd give my right arm for some organization of this track and trace data that's everybody's complaining about. And they had a computer guy and he's like, well, what would you like to see? And I was like, put it where it belongs and color code it. And he was like, all right. About a week or so later, he produced 2 maps. One had per 4x4, one had per plant, and colored it red, yellow, and green. And green was basically what it shook down of what they needed for a yield to be profitable, which is roughly 60 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Break that down into however many 4x4s you got and then color code it. There's remarkable patterns that reveal themselves, and that's what we start to investigate. So in this particular facility, we hadn't done that analytics yet, but we did the microscope assessment, and every single greenhouse had the same pattern. And so what we did was change their method for delivering those beneficial nematodes into a smaller container, a little squirt bottle, and put them directly into the beds, and then all yields leveled out. So that one single change, which was basically nothing, we didn't change anything except for the way they're distributing the nematodes, leads to a 30% increase in yield because now everything's performing the same.
Wow.
So most cultivators are like, man, they all say the same stuff. Doesn't matter if you're hydro or living soil, or big or small. If I could just get another 20%, if I could just get another 30%, sometimes if I get another 40%, that percentage increase that the cultivator is desiring is always in variation. So if everything performed as your good performers, you would find that 20 to 40% increase. But cultivators don't know how to look for that variation.
Right.
And so basically what we do is teach you how to identify that variation. And in living soil, it's through microscope assessment. In hydroponics, it's water delivery rates. So what we do in hydroponics is you get some 1 liter pitchers or something, and you go diagonally across your bed, one in this corner, one in the middle, one in this corner. Do that on a tray, do that on the room, and trigger your irrigation. I've been in one single facility that had equal distribution of liquid from corner to corner, one single facility. That was in some guys from the San Fernando Valley affiliated with rappers doing big things. And one of the dudes from the Valley was good at plumbing and he built a badass system. And when he got to the bigger scale, continued building badass systems. Most of us cannabis growers build atrocious irrigation systems at scale. And so if you're dumping sometimes 200, 300, 400, 500% variation in fertilization to different plants, that variation is where the bugs start.
Right.
100%. So the overwatered ones, sometimes they get the bugs. The underwater ones, sometimes they get the bugs. The ones that are Goldilocks are fine. Okay, well, you need to trim your irrigation system to get at least reasonably consistent distribution. That one change will get you that 30% yield because now everything's doing the same.
Right. You got to come by, check out our facility and see what we're doing because I feel you.
Yeah. See, I feel like, as I said, one of 3 extremely data-driven people I've met in my journey. I'm sure your shit's dialed, So, yeah, I would love to. It's been a little wild here. We got hit by a semi-truck in February. That really shook our world up. And we're still kind of recovering. Yeah, dude. So, not really up for road trips for a minute because the last site visit we were doing, we got smoked by a semi-truck in a snowstorm. So yeah, I still a little shook up. We're getting better. Everything will be fine, but I'm still a couple months out from a road trip. But as soon as I'm ready, yeah, I would love to come see what you're doing. 100%. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate you coming on the show today, man. It's been a good show. It's been very informative. Man, I look forward to having you back again. We'll have to do one in person when you guys can make it.
100%. Yeah. And I'll bring Sarah with me next time. And yeah, I'm just thankful to be around. I'd still probably be stuck in Spain if it wasn't for you. I traveled to cannabis in 2020. I don't watch TV. I don't watch the news. I didn't even know what coronavirus was. And you were like, brother, you better leave tonight. And I'm like, you're tripping. You're like, you need to go. And I went home, checked my hotel. Sure as shit, our tickets were canceled. And I got one of the last tickets out of that country. I would have been one of the people stuck. So I'm still eternally grateful for that. That was my honeymoon too. So I would have been stuck in a hostel in Spain or some shit if it wasn't for you for my honeymoon. So at least I got to get home and make something worth of it. But yeah, dude, eternally grateful. And I just have a lot of respect for the way you conduct yourself in this industry. And, you know, the guys that I came up with behaved a certain way. I'm not saying they were perfect, but there were certain things that they did that were non-negotiable. And you're one of like 3 dudes I've met in my journey that maintains that same ethos, creed, and code. And I mean, anything I can do to help your journey, you let me know. I don't know if there even is anything I can do, but anything I can do to reciprocate you saving me from getting stuck in Spain during a world shutdown, I got your back, you know. And I just have a lot of respect for how you move through the industry. And, you know, there's a lot of people, especially in the breeding world, that do some kooky stuff and, you know, they're not real and transparent. And if I ever have anybody that needs a bunch of seeds, there's one name I call. Is James. That's it. I don't mess with nobody else, you know. And the few people I've sent your way have had nothing but good things to say, and I appreciate that, because my results a lot of times are dictated by the genetics. If I got bad genetics, I can only do so much with it. And if I got a hemp grower that gets a bunch of hot Hermy BS, that's a problem. You know what I mean? And you know, I can trust that your auto flowers are going to work. They're not going to be some 1992 nonsense. Like, they're real, you know. And Thank you. People can count on what you're doing, and I'm still trying to help the push that autoflowers are real. I get some crazy faces from people when I recommend autoflowers, but I believe it, and I believe that you've put in the work, and I hope that other people are able to identify it and recognize that, and I'm sure you're going to be successful just because of the way you move. And there's a reason you're still around, you know. So,
well, I feel the same way about you. You and Sarah do amazing stuff, and you know, I think even with people trying to put down living soil and saying it doesn't yield, you know, there's no way to do it at scale, you guys have always been like, no, this is how you do it. This is what everybody should be doing. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, if it's for you, for sure. If not, I can still help you balance the res.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, whatever.
Sure.
So.
Well, I appreciate you coming on again, and say hi to the wife, and I look forward to having you guys come on the show again soon.
Hell yeah, man. Good talking to you.
Yep. Cheers.